Common sense is not sensical, it is reason that makes sense. By Guy Lakeman. The world is suffering from nonsense and poor judgment. Making a decision through reason is balancing pros and cons and then making the best choice. Common sense doesn't involve a weighing process, it is something you just inherently know and feel from your general experience. Those who use reason are often called complicated and haughty, as a slur, for their reason and judgment is educated and beyond the knowledge of their opponents. Education has depth of study and subjective focus that day-to-day experience does not bring to any discussion. Common sense is defined as sound judgment derived from experience rather than study. People with common sense are seen as reasonable, down-to-earth, reliable, and practical. In a simple environment this is a fair viewpoint, but as the world adds layers of complexity both technical and of increased population beyond the ideologies created in ancient times on small populations with little education, we can no longer rely on common sense but have to use a depth of education for judgment. Basic common sense is still relevant, but it is shallow in a world evolving through brain adaptation in social groups of sizes never seen before and with communication that spans the diverse cultures of a planet. Any sufficiently advanced mindful person is indistinguishable from a magician to someone that is not at their level of mental development. If it doesn't appear as common sense to an inexperienced person, it is deemed too complicated and does not fit into their world of limited experience. If common sense was common, then most people wouldn't make the kinds of decisions they do every day. They wouldn't buy stuff they can't afford. Wouldn't smoke cigarettes or eat junk food. Wouldn't gamble. In any way, including stock markets. And if you want to get really specific and timely, politicians wouldn't be tweeting pictures of their private parts to strangers. In other words, people wouldn't do the multitude of things that are clearly not good for them. Real sense can rarely be derived from experience alone because most people's experiences are limited. Relying on experience alone doesn't usually offer enough information to draw reliable conclusions. So-called common sense is a fallacy that has been foisted on us by our traditional non-progressive culture of ideology, any ideology that wants to tell us what we should think and do, that prefers us to be stupid, ill-informed, and poor decision-makers. The ideology created by those who wish to control others and get a free lunch. Common sense is even used as an ideological cudgel by conservatives in which so-called coastal elites lack common sense and, as a result, are out of touch with real people. The absence of common sense doesn't discriminate based on political ideology. The idea that if most people think something makes sense then it must be sound judgment has been disproven time and time again. Further, it is often people who might be accused of not having common sense who prove that what is common sense is not only not sense, but also completely wrong. And, by the way, common sense is often used by people who don't have the real knowledge, expertise, or direct experience to actually make sound judgments. The unfortunate reality is that trusting common sense, in point of fact, causes us to make poor rather than sound judgments. Perhaps the biggest problem with common sense is that it falls prey to the clear limits of personal experience. Or, we don't even have any actual experience in the matter and rely simply on what we believe to be true or have been told is true, what we might label faith-based sense, in the broadest sense of the word faith. For example, when you're having a discussion about just about anything that requires taking a stand, for example, the weather, the economy, raising children, sports, what have you, how often do you hear some variation of "well, it's been my experience that," fill in the blank, and the person then draws a conclusion based on said experience? And how often is that conclusion wildly at odds with the facts? More often than not in my experience, though, of course, my experience may be insufficient to draw a truly sound conclusion. We need to jettison this notion of the sanctity of common sense and instead embrace reasoned sense, that is, sound judgment based on rigorous study of an issue, which also includes direct experience. Of course, we can't do an in-depth scientific study of every issue for which we need to draw a conclusion or make a decision. We can't, in the formal sense, do a review of the literature that includes relevant theories and the scientific findings to date, prepare detailed hypotheses, design a formal methodology, collect data, and employ complex statistical analyses from which we draw conclusions. But we can, and should, apply many of these basic principles of the scientific method in more informal ways to our daily lives. A course in scientific thinking and methodology for everyday life should be a requirement for all students. Such proactive education about precise thinking in a real sense might reduce the number of truly dunderhead things that subsequent generations will do. The current generations are probably beyond remediation. Here are some ways in which people can engage in more sensical thinking, whether common or otherwise. What does it matter where sense comes from as long as it does truly reflect sound judgment? We can begin our inquiry with an open mind, something sorely lacking in matters both trivial, for example, who's better, Red Sox or Yankees? Red Sox, of course, and substantial, for example, how to fix the budget deficit, these days. Without being receptive to answers that we may not want to hear, we might as well just ask ourselves what we want to be true and go with it and denying any other input, which is what many people with so-called common sense, most efficient, but very often wrong. We all establish hypotheses that we would like to see affirmed when we are asking questions in our lives, for example, about relationships, for example, I know she likes me, or the economy, for example, it's definitely picking up. But for hypotheses to be more than just foregone conclusions, for example, the world is flat, oops, it's important to also propose alternative hypotheses, for example, maybe the world is round or square. Just considering that there might be answers other than the ones we want ensures that any experiment we conduct isn't just an exercise in self-serving affirmation, for example, drug trials done by pharmaceutical companies. We can collect a sizable sample of data that is more likely to be representative of the population as a whole. So, instead of just asking a few friends their opinions on an issue, which are likely similar to our own, we ask others, particularly those we know to have differing views. Does that guarantee sound judgments? Of course not. But does it make it more likely that whatever conclusion is drawn will be closer to reality? Absolutely. The risk of making the wrong conclusion is reduced. We can analyze the data as objectively as possible. Let's be realistic. No one likes to see their theories disproven. And there's a cynical saying in the sciences, if the facts don't fit the theory, throw out the facts. Also, don't forget GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, which describes the failures in human decision-making due to faulty, incomplete, or imprecise data. Thanks Wikipedia. The scientific method attempts to prevent both sayings from being realized by using statistical analyses that, at least in theory, don't allow for the intrusion of human biases. Recent research has found this assumption presumptuous, but it's the best we have at this point. Conclusion. For someone to say they make decisions based on common sense is someone to be very, very wary. The first thing to look at is their experience of what they are proposing. The second is on the depth of education they have in the subject or in a related analytical subject. And then make a decision to listen to their comments based on those premises. What is nonsense to some will make perfect sense to others. Those who think nonsense will dismiss the subject as being too complicated to hide their ignorance and lack of education. Beware, common sense pits emotion and passion against logic and reason. For the uneducated, emotion and passion will always win as they are the tools of the arts which require no brain grease as is required by the sciences and its language of mathematics and grammar of geometry. Equals. Arthur C. Clarke created 3 laws called Clarke's laws. When a distinguished but elderly scientist states that something is possible, he is almost certainly right. When he states that something is impossible, he is very probably wrong. The only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.